They ended my career in 7 minutes over a glitchy Zoom call. And in that same 7 minutes, I decided I would outbuild them, outlast them, and take back everything they thought they could swallow without chewing. My role doesn't align with our new structure, said the woman with the frozen corporate smile and a bookshelf of leadership manuals over her shoulder. Your department is being consolidated. Her name was Sabrina Holt, the fresh face assigned to tame the division after a Fortune 500 giant scooped us up like a souvenir. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. My name is Nolan Avery, 45, and for more than a decade, I led engineering at a company called Flint Harbor Solutions in Raleigh, North Carolina. We were 11 people when I joined, and the carpet still smelled like the previous tenant's burnt coffee. We built industrial energy optimization systems that made factories and utilities run smarter. We wrote the algorithms, tested the hardware, crawled through boiler rooms and rooftops to wire sensors where no sane person wanted to be. The software that made Flint Harbor valuable enough to be acquired? I had my hands in the first line of code and the last. I built the teams that built the future. 3 weeks after that call, I sat at my desk with a stack of contracts and a yellow highlighter, marking the phrases in my non-compete that read like a paint-by-numbers template some lawyer had copied from a blog. They had banned me from using proprietary artifacts, not from applying my brain. They had defined energy management like a kid describing outer space, big, vague, and full of holes. They forgot to tie the clause to geography. They forgot to define competitive product with any precision. They'd written it for employees who don't read fine print, not for people who have built businesses for a living. My phone buzzed. You were right about the new regime, read a message from Priya, my lead platform architect. Innovation pipeline is dead. Are you still thinking about that thing we talked about? Another ping, this time from Miguel in data science. They're killing our ML deployment. Everything moving to legacy stack. Tell me this isn't real. Then Kenji, then Lara, then Owen. 5 engineers, 5 variations of the same quiet panic. I set the phone down and looked at the whiteboard on the wall. It held the names of our top clients and the pain points we'd solved over the years. It also held the name I'd been writing and erasing for months, as if practicing it, until it felt inevitable. Ridgepoint Dynamics. I didn't start Flint Harbor, but I gave it bones and lungs. The founder, Emmett Rhodes, had the original vision: digitize energy flows for heavy industry and make them do real work. Emmett was not a coder. He was a tinkerer, a storyteller, the guy who could walk into a plant and win over a maintenance supervisor in 10 minutes. He hired me because he needed someone to take the sketches on his napkins and turn them into something that didn't crash when the weather changed. We built our first viable platform in a winter of 80-hour weeks. I missed a lot of dinners. My marriage fell apart one carefully broken promise at a time. You're married to that company, my ex-wife said, boxing up the last of her books. She wasn't wrong, and I didn't ask her to stay and celebrate a vow I clearly hadn't kept. For a decade, I said no to recruiters dangling bigger salaries and nicer cafeterias. Emmett never made me sign anything that said equity, but his hand on my shoulder and his voice in my ear. This is your company too, Nolan, felt binding. Then he got sick, and his son Caleb came back from business school wearing fresh confidence and cufflinks that matched his tie clip. Caleb wanted to make us acquirable. He talked about multiples and scale and rationalizing the product line. We replaced our innovation roadmap with a quarterly revenue dashboard. When I asked what happened to the problems we hadn't solved yet, he said, "Let's circle back, Nolan," and moved on. We never circled back. 6 months before the acquisition, I overheard Caleb in a glass-walled conference room, the kind you install so people can see how transparently you're planning their future. 2 executives from Atlas Grid Holdings, our eventual acquirer, sat with him while they went through a list of redundancies. My group was at the top. I remember the feeling in my chest, like I had just watched someone snap a pencil in half, and the pencil was my life. That night, I went home and wrote the title Ridgepoint Dynamics in thick marker at the top of a clean page. If they kept me, I would keep building where I was. If they cut me, I would build somewhere else. Either way, I would keep building. That resolve was the only thing that helped me sleep. When Atlas Grid officially bought us, the press release read like a wedding announcement. Complementary capabilities, shared mission, minimal disruption. The photo showed executives smiling with too many teeth. Sabrina, their appointed head for our unit, told us at an all-hands, We value the talent that made Flint Harbor what it is. 8 days later, the first layoffs hit. A month later, the platform strategy deck arrived. 6 weeks in, Sabrina stood on the stage where we used to demo breakthroughs and announced that Flint Harbor's systems would be phased out over 18 months as we harmonized to Atlas's enterprise architecture. It was a generation behind for the kinds of clients we served. We'd built what we built because their approach couldn't handle the complexity on the ground. They weren't listening to the field. They were rearranging furniture in a house they didn't know the floor plan for. I didn't ask questions at that meeting. I watched instead. Some people nodded along, those who were safe or thought they were. Others stared at their notebooks like they'd found a secret passage if they could just read hard enough. I walked to my car afterward and sat still long enough for my windshield to fog despite the cold. It wasn't just a job. It was years of nights and weekends and paper plates with cold pizza on top of laptops. And it was about to be dismantled by people who thought a system is just a diagram until the moment it breaks in front of a regulator. 2 days before they cut me loose, HR asked for a quick chat about my team structure. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't about my team. The same afternoon, Sabrina requested full access to my archives and the long-term development roadmaps. I handed over everything neatly documented and up to date, professional to the end, and also because I could hear the clock clicking and I didn't want any accusation to stick. When the 7-minute termination call came, my fingers were already typing a message to the 5 people I trusted most. Time to talk about the project. Dinner at my place tomorrow at 7. They showed up with takeout and stories. Priya's pipeline had been frozen. Kenji's control logic redesign was shelved because we don't have appetite for that level of customization. Lara's data ingest refactor was replaced with a vendor connector that looked nice in a sales demo and died under load. Miguel was told to migrate his models into a standard library that didn't support the features he'd built. Owen had been asked to rewrite an event stream to match a template that mapped exactly to the problems we had solved 4 years ago and then outgrown. I'm not asking you to break your contracts, I told them. I'm asking you to tell the truth with your feet if you're ready. We ate. We went through my slide deck for Ridgepoint. We talked about values like they were not just words on a wall. Build what works, serve the people who have to use it, treat the contract like a promise, not a weapon. Then we talked about enemies. Not the people, but the behaviors. Complacency. CYA politics. The quiet death of good ideas because the wrong person didn't understand them. Over the next 3 weeks, we met at my house at night, while Atlas Grid issued more memos about synergy. We took apart their strategy and laid the pieces out on my dining table like an old radio, identifying where every wire would cross and short. We listed clients who would feel the pain first: mid-market manufacturers with messy, real-world processes, utilities with regulatory reporting that can't tolerate any gap, facilities whose customizations were temporary hacks that had become business-critical over time. We were careful. We built our own architecture from scratch after work hours, not copying a single diagram or line of code. We wrote and signed a founder's agreement. We picked a name: Ridgepoint Dynamics. It felt like a place you climb to so you can see farther. I used my severance to rent 2 rooms in a brick building on Fayetteville Street with a view of a bus stop and a sushi joint that delivered late. I registered the entity, filed the tax paperwork, opened a bank account that looked paltry next to Atlas's balance sheet, but felt like freedom. The day the last direct deposit from Atlas hit, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. "We should talk before you do anything rash," Caleb wrote. "There might be a way back for you." There had been 1,000 ways back while I was still inside asking about the future. I didn't reply. I texted my team instead. "Office is ready. Documents filed. Are you prepared to resign tomorrow?" 5 variations of yes came back as fast as the bubbles could form. After midnight, the office quiet as a held breath, I looked at the one framed photo I'd brought from my desk. Emmett and me next to our first real prototype, both of us looking like we hadn't slept, but didn't need to because we were running on adrenaline and belief. "This is for you, Emmett," I said out loud. "And for everybody who stayed late and did the hard thing because it was the right thing to do." By the end of our 3rd month, we had our first serious shot. Northwind Utilities, a regional provider across 3 states that had been a Flint Harbor customer for years. I knew their operations director, a man named Anthony Reese who could recite outage stats like baseball scores and who kept a jar of peppermints on his desk nobody ever ate. Atlas had promised him a seamless migration. He had been living through the opposite. They keep trying to standardize our requirements, he said in our pitch meeting, exhaustion flattening his voice. We're not standard. We're us. We showed him Ridgepoint's platform working on a test dataset that looked like his world, not a sanitized demo. We didn't promise magic. We promised alignment with the rules he lived under and the realities he couldn't ignore. He signed a contract before lunch, and we took a slow breath we hadn't realized we'd been holding for months. 2 days later, a courier arrived at our door with a thick envelope from Atlas Grid's legal department. Cease and desist. It screamed in formal language. They accused us of breaching my non-compete, of stealing confidential know-how, of poaching staff. They demanded we shut down operations. Our attorney, Alina Morrow, had a laugh that sounded like a cello. Their non-compete is a mess, she said after an hour with the documents. Too broad to be enforceable, no geographic scope, and it hinges on proprietary artifacts you are not using. They're counting on you to panic. We didn't panic, but we also weren't delusional. Atlas had deep pockets, and court filings cost money no matter how right you are. I decided to meet with Sabrina directly. Maybe she wanted a truce. Maybe she wanted to look me in the eye and tell me she'd bury us. Either way, it would be useful to know. The Atlas office downtown was steel and glass and public company confidence. The Flint Harbor logo sat in a corner of the lobby like a trophy from a ski weekend. Sabrina shook my hand in a conference room that smelled like lemon polish and fear. Let's be practical, she said. Atlas can litigate this for years. You have, what, a few months of cash? We could bring you back as a consultant during the transition. 2-year contract. Excellent compensation. There it was, the velvet handcuff. Wrap me up long enough to neutralize me while they finished pushing our systems onto their rails. You're phasing out what I built, I said, standing. You said so on stage. Ridgepoint doesn't use a single line of Flint Harbor code. I'm willing to let our performance speak for us. Her smile thinned. This isn't over, Mr. Avery. It will be for us, I said, when the work is done. Atlas escalated like I knew they would. They called Anthony at Northwind and 2 other prospects we were courting. They told them there were open questions about Ridgepoint's IP and hinted at audits and voided maintenance agreements if they dared sign with us. Anthony phoned me after hours, voice low like we were planning a heist. They're threatening to rattle every file cabinet in our building. I don't have the political capital to survive that right now. Within a day, 3 deals evaporated. Our runway shortened to weeks. My team gathered in our small office and looked at me like kids do when the fire alarm goes off and no one can smell smoke yet. They're trying to starve us, I said. But they made a tactical mistake. They forgot what they bought. That morning I'd received an email from an address I hadn't seen in a year. Emmett, Atlas didn't just acquire your tech, he wrote. They bought our problems, too. Come up to Falls Lake. We need to talk. When Emmett opened his door that afternoon, he looked older, but his eyes were still sharp as wire. We spread documents across his kitchen island. They think they purchased simplicity, he said. They purchased obligations. He slid over a memo forwarded by a board member who'd stayed loyal to him. Northwind's contract includes 99% uptime guarantees with specified penalties. We negotiated them in because utilities can't afford to play games with reporting. Atlas plans to move them onto their standard stack on a 6-month timeline. You and I both know that's impossible without dropping data. I stared at the paragraph about performance penalties like it was a cheat code. Do they know? I asked. Emmett shook his head. Their CEO doesn't. Their CTO might suspect it, but Atlas has been telling them the migration is straightforward. Caleb signed the acquisition paperwork that let Atlas reduce the final payout based on integration costs. We got 60 cents on the dollar. They blindsided him with a 100-page appendix. He thought he was clever. He didn't see the trap. It was a tidy kind of cruelty. Acquire the future and then use the past to justify paying less for it. On the drive back to Raleigh, a plan formed cleanly enough that I felt my breathing slow. Atlas would do what they were going to do. We didn't need to stop them. We needed to be standing where Northwind could see us when Atlas failed them, with a bridge already built and tested. Call the team, I told Priya. 7 a.m. tomorrow. We're accelerating. We didn't reach out to Northwind. We built for them without saying their name out loud. We replicated their quirkier data quirks from memory, then sent 100,000 simulated meter reads into our new ingest with patterns designed to fail if we'd missed anything. We wrote adapters that would let their existing control room screens talk to our backend with no one noticing except for the part where everything got faster. We wrote a regulatory reporting module that could spit out the exact XML schema their oversight board demanded with a single click, and then we corrupted it on purpose to make sure it rejected junk the right way. We documented everything like we expected a judge to read it. At night, Emmett made calls to old friends not to gossip, but to ask surgical questions. If someone forced your grid management onto an architecture without native support for late-arriving telemetry, how long before your compliance data had holes in it? The answers were measured in weeks, not months. The first crack came 5 weeks in. Atlas began phase 1 of the Northwind migration. 3 substations reported missing intervals. Northwind put on a brave face. Expected transition issues, their CTO, Valerie Chun, told a reporter. Privately, she had a reputation for destroying incompetence with a look. 2 weeks later, Atlas started Phase 2, and a reporting blackout blanketed a service region for 4 hours on a weekday morning. That's an eternity if you're a utility filling out federal forms that assume you know where every electron went. Northwind issued a notice of deficiency, triggering those penalties. Atlas replied with a memo that blamed legacy architectural limitations inherited from the acquired platform. The people who didn't know what those words meant nodded. The ones who did slammed a fist into their desk because the old system had been ugly, sure, but it hadn't dropped intervals. That memo was our opening. We wrote a technical brief that didn't throw anyone under the bus, but did show exactly how Atlas's integration approach created timestamp collisions and truncated late packets. Emmett delivered it to Valerie in person with the gentle smile he used to save for hard sells. 3 days later, a text came to a number we had created just for this purpose. Coffee. 2 p.m. tomorrow. Corner table at City and Elm. VC. Valerie was already there when I arrived. She didn't waste a syllable. Your analysis matches ours. Atlas is forcing us into their standard package to lower their costs. The risk is on us. I nodded. You need a path that doesn't interrupt compliance reporting. She leaned back. Do we have one? I slid over a drive with a technical overview of Ridgepoint's platform. We built this to overlay your existing control room displays and sit under them like scaffolding. We don't need to rip anything out to start. We can stand up a shadow version in 3 weeks and cut over without a blip. She didn't touch the drive. Atlas claims you violated your non-compete. If I take a meeting with you, they'll accuse me of collusion. I slid over a second drive. Our counsel's opinion on why their clause falls apart. You'll want your lawyers to verify. They will. 2 nights later, Atlas announced stabilization measures for Northwind. The measures included rolling back part of their own migration. Their stock slid on the news. Investors don't like words like stabilization. That afternoon, we received a formal request from Northwind for an emergency proposal under their crisis procurement policy. We wrote it with the precision of people who know their math will be audited. We priced our implementation aggressively, but fair. We specified key personnel and timelines and rollback plans. We attached the legal memo. Then we hit send and waited the kind of waiting that makes you want to pace holes into floors. At 10:43 a.m. on a hot Thursday, my phone buzzed while I was pretending to read email. Unanimous board approval, Valerie said when I answered. Contract to follow today. Start Monday. I stared at the wall long enough for Priya to ask if I was having a stroke. We got it, I said, and the room made a sound like a pressure valve releasing. Atlas filed for an emergency injunction before sunset to block the contract, citing irreparable harm. The hearing was Monday morning, same time we were supposed to be on Northwind's floor. We arrived with Alina and 3 bankers' boxes of truth. Atlas brought 4 attorneys in matching suits and a slideshow about ethics. Sabrina sat behind them, hands folded, composed like a portrait. The judge, a woman with gray hair and the posture of a dancer, read filings like sheet music. Your agreement prohibits use of proprietary artifacts, she said to Atlas. You have not demonstrated that Ridgepoint used any. Furthermore, utilities are a public interest. Delaying the implementation of a solution that restores compliance harms the public. Injunction denied. The gavel didn't slam. It clicked against wood like a lock opening. Sabrina stopped me in the hallway. This isn't the end, she said softly. Atlas doesn't lose. I met her eyes. This isn't about who wins. It's about who keeps the lights on. I walked past her to where my people were waiting with laptops and backpacks, and the kind of tired excitement that feels better than caffeine. We drove straight to Northwind and started plugging in. The next 3 weeks were the kind of beautiful misery builders live for. We rotated 12-hour shifts. We stood behind operators and watched what they did with their hands so we could make the new button live where their muscle memory already reached. We parsed logs at 2 in the morning and made small fixes that felt like performing surgery on a living system while standing on a rolling ship. At 2:07 a.m. on day 19, the final report ran end-to-end without a single error, and the number on the dashboard that had been red for a week and a half turned green and stayed green. Anthony stood behind me and didn't say anything for a full minute. Then he put a peppermint in my hand, like a christening. News doesn't travel fast in our industry until it does. Northwind's audit came back clean. Their board issued a public statement praising Ridgepoint's emergency intervention. Atlas pivoted to press releases about refocusing core competencies. They stopped returning calls from a trade journalist who asked annoying questions about whether their integration playbook needed revising. We signed 2 more clients by the end of the quarter. One, a manufacturer of agricultural equipment that had taken a bath trying to wedge their unique process into a generic workflow. The other, a city consortium that had been trying to tie water and power and transit sensors together with duct tape. Atlas sent another letter with more Latin words in bold. Alina filed it where it belonged. 18 months after that Zoom call, Ridgepoint had 27 employees and a floor of a building with a view of 7 oaks where the oaks actually look like the name. We had a meditation room that nobody used for meditating because it turned into the place people went to laugh too hard at memes. We had a policy that the person closest to the problem was the person who got to propose the first solution, regardless of title. We had a rule that no one was allowed to wave hands. If you didn't know, you said, "I don't know." And we figured it out. We delivered what we promised when we promised, or we called a client before they had to call us. We made money, yes, but more importantly, we slept well. Atlas did what big companies do when they can't get the outcome they want. They reorged. Sabrina was reassigned to a special project at a subsidiary in another state. Caleb left to join a startup incubator with a biography that read like a lesson learned the expensive way. Emmett visited sometimes. He never asked for a desk. He stood in doorways, hands in pockets, and watched people work with the satisfaction of someone who had carried a spark a long time and finally seen it take again. He told me one afternoon, "You built the thing I meant to build." I shook my head. "You built it." I just remembered how. On the 2nd anniversary of my termination, I got an email from the person who hired me at Flint Harbor when we were 11 people and the server was a tower under a folding table. "You did it better than we ever could have under them," he wrote. "Some wins are just the long route." I closed my laptop, walked to the common area where Priya and Miguel and Kenji were arguing good-naturedly about whether to name a module after a mountain or a river, and told them we were buying lunch. When the food arrived, I raised a plastic cup of seltzer. "To the 7-minute call," I said, "and to what it accidentally gave us." At dusk that night, I stood on my deck with a view of a sky the color of old denim. The bitterness that had lived in my mouth for months after they cut me was gone, dissolved by work that mattered. I thought about the early mornings when my ex-wife would look at me like I was a stranger and I'd whisper apologies to the future. I thought about Emmett's lake house table covered in papers, about Valerie's steady eyes across the small cafe table, about Anthony's peppermint pressed into my palm. I thought about the engineers who left paycheck certainty to chase something we'd only named, and the interns who walked into our office and saw a future they wanted to inhabit because you could feel the difference between performative values and the ones you trip over every day. People call what I did revenge. Maybe it is. It didn't feel like torching a building so much as refusing to let someone board up the windows on my house. I didn't set out to ruin Atlas. I set out to make sure the work we did for years didn't get erased because a spreadsheet told a story that wasn't true. The best revenge I know is building something that survives boredom and politics and even your own mistakes. It's seeing a number turn green at 2 in the morning and knowing it's not luck. It's the result of hundreds of choices you and your people made to be honest when lying would have been easier. Months later, Valerie sent a short note on a Friday evening. "We passed a surprise audit today," it read. 0 exceptions. First time in 8 years. Tell your team we noticed. I forwarded it to everyone with just a single word, wins. Priya responded with a photo from the office. A paper sign taped above the coffee machine that said, in block letters, build the thing that works. Underneath, someone had written, smaller, and tell the truth about it. Every once in a while, I still wake up at 3 a.m. and remember the moment the Zoom window closed, and it was just me and my reflection in a humming monitor. I remember the quiet that came after, the kind that isn't absence but possibility. I remember opening a blank document and typing a name, Ridgepoint Dynamics. Back then it was just an idea on a white screen. Today it pays salaries and mortgages, keeps utility regulators from calling emergency meetings, and hires kids who remind me of myself at 22, hungry, and certain the world needs what they can make. I don't know if Atlas tells themselves a story where they're the heroes. I hope so. It's easier to live if your story makes sense to you. Mine makes sense to me. They tried to consolidate me out of existence. I turned consolidation into a company. They tried to turn innovation into a line item. I turned it back into a practice. They used a contract as a weapon. I used mine as a promise. They dragged me into a hallway and shut the door. I found another door and opened it so wide other people could walk through. If you're waiting for the moment where I say I forgave them, here it is. I don't carry them anymore. They're not in my house. They're a weather system that moved through and taught me where the roof leaked so I could fix it. If I saw Sabrina on the sidewalk outside a coffee shop, I'd hold the door for her because that's just a thing I do. If Caleb emailed to ask for advice, I'd tell him to stop trying to engineer outcomes and start engineering empathy. If a young engineer came to me with a job offer letter from a company like Atlas, I'd tell them to read the contract out loud to themselves and underline the parts that sound like they were written by someone who doesn't believe in what they build. On the wall of Ridgepoint's conference room, there's a framed printout of a log excerpt from the night Northwind turned green. It shows a series of timestamps and the kind of terse messages machines send each other when humans aren't listening. It's ugly. It's perfect. We keep it there to remind ourselves that beneath the fancy diagrams and the pitches and the hearings, this is what matters. A system doing what it's supposed to do, when it's supposed to do it. So the lights stay on and people can cook dinner and read bedtime stories and plug in trucks and charge phones and live their lives without ever knowing our names. That's the kind of revenge I can recommend to anyone. I think about Emmett sometimes, the way he stood in our doorway near the end of one of his visits, hands in his pockets, head cocked like he was listening for a sound I couldn't hear. You know what my dad told me when I tried to fix a radio once? He asked. He said, if you can't get the music, fix the static. He smiled. Thanks for fixing the static, Nolan. After he left, I wrote it on the whiteboard above the list of clients and pain points and on the corner where someone had drawn a cartoon mountain with a flag at the top. The board is full now. We erase things, we add others, we make plans and tear them up and make better ones. The sentence remains. It's not profound, and it is. It's how we got here. It's how we'll keep going.